Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what would Deku's quirk be if he was born with one. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The world, to a 4-year-old Izuku Midoriya, was a vibrant tapestry of primary colors and explosive potential. It was the brilliant crimson of All Might's cape, the sunshine yellow of his hair, and the dazzling cerulean of his eyes. It was the thunderous orange of Kaken's palms, a sign of greatness that everyone, even the teachers, praised. Izuku's world was a countdown, a breathless anticipation for the day his own unique color would manifest and paint itself onto the canvas of his life. He sat on the examination table at the Muzidafu Quirk Counseling Pediatrics Center, his little legs swinging in a frantic rhythm that made the crinkly paper beneath him rustle like autumn leaves. The room smelled of antiseptic and a faint, sweet cherry scent from the lollipops in a jar on the counter. It was a sterile, white world, but Izuku barely noticed. His mind was a supernova of possibilities. Maybe I'll breathe fire like my dad, he whispered to his All Might action figure, clutched tightly in his right hand. Or maybe I'll have your super strength. Or maybe I can pull things to me, like Mom. His mother, Inko Midoriya, wrung her hands from her seat beside the table. Her smile was a fragile, hopeful thing. For weeks, every time Izuku sneezed or tripped or reached for a toy, they would both hold their breath, waiting for the spark. Nothing had happened. The other kids in his kindergarten class had already started showing their quirks. One girl could change her hair color, a boy could extend his fingers by an inch, and Kaken could make explosions. Kaken was already a hero. Don't worry, sweetie, Inko said, her voice a soothing balm. Whatever your quirk is, it will be wonderful. The door opened, and Dr. Tsubasa entered, a kind-faced, elderly man with large, round glasses that magnified his eyes. He held a tablet in his hand, his expression unreadable. Well, Midoriya-san, Izuku-kun, he began, pulling a stool over. We've run the tests. The X-ray confirmed it. He has only one joint in his pinky toe, which is a near-certain indicator of a quirk factor. Izuku gasped, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He had it. He had the sign. He looked at his mom, his eyes wide and shining. Inko let out a shaky sigh of relief, a tear tracing a path down her cheek. Oh, thank goodness, she whispered. Dr. Tsubasa offered a thin smile. Indeed. Your son does have a quirk, and quite a rare one at that. It's a type of energy manipulation. We had to use a kinetic sensor to even register it. He turned to Izuku. Izuku-kun, do you remember when I had you fall back onto that soft mat? Izuku nodded eagerly. You told me not to catch myself. That's right. And when you landed, our sensors picked up a fascinating reading. Your body instantaneously absorbed almost all of the kinetic energy from the impact. It didn't displace. It didn't vanish. It was drawn into you. Inko's brow furrowed. Absorbed? What does that mean? It means, the doctor continued, his tone shifting from academic curiosity to professional caution, that his body has the ability to take in kinetic force, from a fall, a push, a punch, perhaps even vibrations, and store it. We've tentatively named the quirk, kinetic rebound. Izuku's mind ignited. Rebound? So I can send it back? Like a shield? Can I be a shield hero, like Crusader? In a sense, yes, Dr. Tsubasa said, his gaze fixed on Inko. The caution in his voice deepened. He can release the stored energy. During our tests, we applied a small, calibrated impact to his forearm. The energy stored, and then we asked him to try and push it out. He did. The doctor swiped on his tablet and showed them a short video. It showed Izuku's small arm, and then a small device tapping it. A faint, almost imperceptible tracery of green light, like a crack in emerald glass, spread for a split second under Izuku's skin. Then, the video showed Izuku concentrating, his face scrunched up, and a small puff of force shot from his palm, knocking over a stack of foam blocks a few feet away. Izuku's jaw dropped. Whoa! I did that! I'm like Kaken. Not exactly, Izuku-kun, the doctor said softly. He zoomed in on the video, on the moment after the energy was released. Izuku's small hand was already turning a mottled purple. The release of that energy, even that tiny amount, caused significant cellular damage. Deep tissue bruising, micro tears in the muscle fibers. The backlash is severe. The vibrant colors in Izuku's world began to gray at the edges. Backlash? Inko stood up, her face pale. Damage? You mean, using his quirk hurts him? Proportionately so, Dr. Tsubasa confirmed, his expression grim. The more energy he absorbs, the more he can release. The more he releases, the more catastrophic the damage to his own body. A small burst, like the one in the video, results in severe bruising. Releasing the energy from, say, a fall from a jungle gym, could shatter the bones in his arm. A car crash. He trailed off, letting the implication hang in the sterile air. His body is a container, Midoriya-san. And it's a fragile one. The power he can channel far exceeds what his biological systems can safely handle. The cherry scent in the room suddenly smelled cloying and sick. The white walls felt like they were closing in. Izuku looked down at his hands, the same hands that held his all-might figure. He had a quirk. A real, powerful quirk. But it was a monster hiding inside him. A monster that would chew up his own bones if he let it out. So what do we do? Inko's voice was barely a whisper. The joy had been completely drained from her face, replaced by a deep, primal fear. For now, we advise extreme caution, the doctor said, standing. He needs to avoid physical altercations. He needs to learn to control the absorption, to perhaps let it dissipate naturally, though we don't even know if that's possible. Primarily, he must not, under any circumstances, attempt a powerful release. It could be crippling. It could even be fatal. The finality of the doctor's words was a hammer blow. He had a quirk. And it was a curse. The walk home was a blur of muted sounds and colors. Inko held his hand so tightly his knuckles ached, her gaze constantly scanning the pavement ahead as if a crack in the sidewalk was a mortal enemy. Izuku was quiet, his all-might figure now feeling heavy and foreign in his grip. The words echoed in his head, shattered the bones. Crippling. Fatal. When they got back to their small apartment, Inko knelt before him, her eyes swimming with tears. She pulled him into a hug that was both fierce and trembling. Oh, Izuku! She sobbed into his hair, and the words were a ghostly echo of a different, more tragic timeline. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry! She wasn't sorry that he was quirkless. She was sorry his dream had come true with a price tag written in his own blood and bone. Izuku hugged her back, his face buried in her shoulder, and for the first time, he felt a profound and terrifying chasm open between himself and his hero. All Might saved people without getting hurt. All Might was a pillar of strength. Izuku was just fragile. The playground was a kingdom, and Katsuki Bakugo was its undisputed king. His quirk was everything a child could dream of, loud, flashy, and powerful. He stood atop the jungle gym, his hands popping with miniature, harmless explosions, a retinue of sycophantic children looking up at him in awe. My quirk is the best, he declared, a grin splitting his face. I'm gonna be the next All Might, and all you losers are gonna be my sidekicks. Izuku sat in the sandbox, listlessly pushing sand into a mound. It had been a week since the diagnosis. A week of his mother's worried glances and his own gnawing anxiety. He hadn't told anyone about his quirk. What was there to say? I have a super cool power that will break my arms if I use it. It felt shameful. A secret, broken thing. Suddenly, a cry broke the air. Bakugo, in his descent from the jungle gym, had shoved another boy, one with a minor gigantification quirk that let him puff up his cheeks like a blowfish. The boy stumbled and fell, scraping his knee. Tears welled in his eyes. You pushed me, Katsuki! The boy wailed. Bakugo scoffed, landing gracefully. So? You were in my way, pufferfish. Get up. He loomed over the crying child, his palms starting to smoke. Or do you want a real reason to cry? Something inside Izuku snapped. It was the same instinct that made him watch hero videos for hours, the same spark that made him idolize All Might. It was a deep, unshakable belief that the strong were meant to protect the weak, not prey on them. He scrambled to his feet, sand falling from his clothes, and ran between them. He was smaller than Bakugo, smaller than most kids, but he spread his arms wide, mimicking the stance of his favorite hero. His body trembled, but his voice was surprisingly steady. "Stop it, Kaken," he said. "You're making him cry. If you keep going, I'll never forgive you." The playground went silent. The other children stared. Bakugo's arrogant smirk faltered, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated disbelief. "You!" Bakugo sneered, a plume of smoke rising from his hand. "What are you gonna do, Deku? You don't even have a quirk." The name, Deku, the useless one, had been Bakugo's moniker for him for months. It always stung, but today it felt like a brand being pressed into his skin. "I do have a quirk," Izuku blurted out, the secret tumbling from his lips before he could stop it. Bakugo's eyes widened, then narrowed in suspicion. "Liar! What is it then? Crying? Being a worthless nerd?" Before Izuku could answer, Bakugo shoved him hard. It wasn't a playful push, it was a dismissal, an act of contempt. "Get out of my way!" Izuku's feet tangled, and he fell backward. The world tilted, blue sky, spinning trees, the shocked faces of the other children. He hit the ground with a dull thud, but something was wrong. There was no pain. Instead, a strange warmth bloomed in his chest and spread through his limbs. He looked down at his arms and gasped. Under the skin, faint, spiderweb-thin lines of emerald light were glowing, tracing his veins like a fractured circuit board. It was the same phenomenon from the doctor's office, but 10 times more intense. He had instinctively, unconsciously, absorbed the kinetic energy of the fall. The feeling was intoxicating, a low thrum of contained power that made the hair on his arms stand up. Bakugo stared, his mouth agape. The other kids pointed and whispered. "Whoa, look! He's glowing!" The king was momentarily dethroned. The attention was no longer on him. His disbelief curdled into rage. This Deku had a quirk all along? And he was trying to show him up. "So you weren't lying," Bakugo growled, his hands lighting up with a series of sharp, angry pops. "Fine. Let's see what your stupid glowing quirk can do against this." He lunged forward, his right hand crackling, aimed not to hit Izuku, but to intimidate, a blast of hot air and light right in his face. Panic seized Izuku. The doctor's warning screamed in his head. Backlash. Shatter. Crippling. The thrumming energy inside him felt like a cornered animal, desperate to escape. He didn't think. He didn't plan. He threw his hands up to shield his face, an instinctual, terrified gesture, and he let the energy out. It wasn't a concussive blast like Bakugo's. It was a silent, invisible fist of pure kinetic force that erupted from his palms. The stored energy from the fall, amplified by his panic, shot outward. The air rippled. Bakugo, caught mid-lunge, was thrown backward as if he'd been hit by a car, tumbling end over end before landing in a heap 5 feet away, the wind completely knocked out of him. The playground was dead silent. Then, the pain hit Izuku. It was a white-hot, blinding agony that started in his wrists, and shot up to his shoulders. He screamed, a raw, piercing sound of pure torment. He collapsed onto his side, cradling his arms. The beautiful green glow was gone. In its place, a horrific, deep purple bruise was already blossoming across his forearms, swelling his tiny wrists to nearly twice their normal size. It felt as if someone had taken a sledgehammer to both of his arms. Bakugo pushed himself up, coughing. He wasn't seriously hurt, just shocked and bruised. He saw Izuku on the ground, wailing, his arms a mangled mess. He saw the other kids staring, not at him, the victor, but at Izuku, the source of the strange power and the awful screaming. Their expressions weren't of awe, but of fear and pity. Something twisted in Bakugo's gut. Deku hadn't beaten him. Deku had a quirk that beat himself. He wasn't strong. He was a freak. A self-destructing toy. He got to his feet, brushing the sand off his shorts. He walked over to the whimpering Izuku, his shadow falling over him. "Deku!" he said, the name now dripping with a new kind of venom, a derision born not from quirklessness, but from perceived patheticness. "So that's your quirk? You hit people by breaking your own arms? That's the most useless, stupid thing I've ever seen." He didn't need to hit him again. The words were 100 times more effective. They redefined Izuku not as a rival, or even an obstacle, but as a fundamental failure, an existence whose very power was a weakness. From that day on, the bullying changed. He was no longer the pebble on the side of the road. He was a cracked vase, an object of mockery and morbid curiosity. The taunts became more pointed, more cruel. "Don't bump into Deku, you might make him explode! Hey Deku, why don't you punch the wall? I wanna see your arm turn purple again, he's crying. Look at that. He can't even use his quirk without bawling like a baby." Kaken led the charge, his superiority complex now cemented by the undeniable fact that his quirk made him stronger, while Deku's just made him broken. Izuku learned to walk with his head down, to make himself small, to never, ever fight back. He learned to absorb the kinetic energy of casual shoves in the hallway, the impact of books being knocked from his hands, the sting of a pebble thrown at his back. He never released it. He just let it build up inside him, a constant, low-level thrum of pain and potential, a silent testament to the power he was too terrified to use. His body became a prison for his own quirk. The years bled into one another, each marked by the same routine of fear and fascination. At home, his mother patted the corners of furniture and flinched whenever he tripped. At school, he was a ghost, a pariah known for his bizarre, self-harming quirk. But in the quiet solitude of his room, another Izuku Midoriya was being forged. It started with a single notebook, its cover emblazoned with the words, "Hero Analysis for the Future, Number 1. Initially, it was born of pure fandom. He would watch videos of All Might's debut, pausing the footage to sketch his costume, to try and capture the impossible physics of his smile. He'd write notes in the margins. "Super strong. Is it a simple augmentation quirk? Or something more?" But after the playground incident, the purpose of his analysis began to shift. It became less about admiration and more about desperation. He was a man with a locked door and no key, and he was convinced a hero out there had to have a copy. His focus turned from a hero's strengths to their weaknesses, their limits, their drawbacks. He watched a clip of President Mike shattering a block of concrete with his voice quirk, but Izuku's eyes were on the directional speaker around the hero's neck. He paused, sketched it, and wrote, "Quirk voice. Drawback. Potentially damages his own hearing. Mitigated by support gear. Collar directs the sonic blast, protecting his ears. Could a device help me direct my quirk's backlash? Maybe something to vent the excess energy?" He found a rare interview with the R-rated hero, Midnight. She mentioned how overuse of her somnambulist quirk could make her drowsy. Quirk, somnambulist. Drawback, self-affecting. Solution, costume made of a special fabric that is ultra-breathable and can be torn away easily, allowing her to deploy her quirk from her skin with maximum efficiency and minimum exposure time. She controls the duration to manage the drawback. His analysis of Endeavor was pages long. The Hellflame hero was immensely powerful, but news reports and fan forums were filled with mentions of him overheating, of needing to cool down after immense exertions. Drawback, overheating. His body can't handle the upper limits of its own heat output. He fights in short, overwhelming bursts. A strategy of power conservation? Or is it a forced limitation? Does he have a support item for cooling that I can't see? Maybe built into his boots? He even analyzed Eraserhead, the underground hero he'd only seen in a few grainy clips online. The hero's eyes would glow, and a quirk would be nullified. But Izuku noticed the hero blinked constantly, rubbing his eyes after every fight. Quirk, erasure. Drawback, severe dry eye. Requires constant use of eye drops. He keeps them in his utility belt. A simple, non-tech solution to a biological problem. My problem is biological. Is there a simple solution? His notebooks became a meticulous, almost obsessive library of pain management and power mitigation. He wasn't just a fanda. He was a researcher hunting for a cure. Each page was a prayer, a desperate plea to the universe that someone, somewhere, had figured out how to wield a power that fought them back every step of the way. He studied fighting styles, support gear, rescue techniques, anything that could give him a clue. He analyzed how Backdraft controlled the water from his hands to avoid backsplash, and how Gang Orca used his hypersonic waves and controlled bursts to avoid disorienting himself. The answer was always the same: control, support, and strategy. But their drawbacks were side effects. His was the main event. Their quirks were guns with a kickback. His was a bomb he had to hold in his hands. Over the years, his body became a canvas of his failed experiments. Trying to release a tiny amount of energy from his fingertip left a starburst of faint, silvery scars on his knuckle. A stumble down a short flight of stairs made him absorb too much, too quickly, and he spent a week with a deep, aching pain in his legs, the skin marked by that now familiar, faint pattern of fractured light. The scars didn't hurt, but they were a constant reminder of the volatile power sleeping just beneath his skin. He was 10 years old now, a boy made of scars and secrets, his heart a frantic mix of heroic ambition and mortal terror. He sat at his desk, the glow of his computer monitor illuminating the No. 7 on his newest notebook. He had just gotten home from school, Bakudo's latest jeer still ringing in his ears. "Careful on your way home, Deku. A stiff breeze might just shatter you." He clicked on his favorite bookmark. The video was old, grainy, a relic from over a decade ago. A massive disaster scene. Fire, smoke, screaming, and then, a figure emerging from the wreckage, carrying half a dozen people on his back. The camera zoomed in on a face smeared with soot but lit by an indomitable smile. "Fear not, citizens!" the booming voice of a young All Might declared. "For I am here!" The people he rescued, the onlookers, even the newscasters choked with emotion. They weren't just saved, they were filled with hope. That smile cut through the despair like a searchlight. Izuku watched, his breath caught in his throat. He had seen this video 1,000 times, but tonight, it felt different. He looked at All Might, a man who could take a punch from a giant villain and not even flinch. A man whose body was a perfect vessel for his power. And then he looked at his own hand, resting on the desk. He could see the faint, web-like scars on his knuckles in the monitor's light. A permanent record of his quirk's cruelty. The chasm between them felt wider than the ocean. How could he possibly be a hero? How could he save people when his own power was a suicide switch? The doctor's words, Bakugo's taunts, his mother's fearful eyes, they all swirled into a vortex of hopelessness in his mind. It was impossible. A cruel joke. But then he looked back at the screen. At the faces of the people All Might had saved. Their tears weren't of sadness, but of overwhelming relief. Their fear had been replaced by awe. All Might hadn't just stopped a villain, he had saved their hearts, and Izuku understood. Being a hero wasn't about not getting hurt. It wasn't about having the perfect, painless quirk. It was about the person you saved. It was about standing between them and the danger, no matter the cost. It was about smiling to reassure them, even if you were bleeding, even if you were breaking. All Might smiled because he was strong enough that he didn't have to worry. But what if a hero smiled because he had to? To hide his own pain, to make sure the person he was saving only felt hope? A new resolve, hard and sharp as diamond, crystallized in Izuku's chest. The fear was still there. The pain was a certainty. But for the first time, they seemed less like a wall and more like a hurdle. A price to be paid. He slowly clenched his hand into a fist, ignoring the familiar, dull ache in his scarred knuckles. He stared at the smiling, unwavering face of his idol on the screen, a silent promise passing from a broken boy to a symbol of hope. "Even if it hurts," Izuku whispered, his voice thick with unshed tears and a terrifying, unshakable determination. "Even if it breaks me, I'll still be a hero. I'll save people with a smile, just like you." Outside, the world was full of vibrant heroes and powerful quirks. But in that small, dark room, a different kind of hero was born, one who knew his path to saving others would be paved with his own fractured pieces. And he was resolved to walk it anyway. The transition from elementary to middle school was less a step up and more a lateral shift into a new, larger fishbowl, but with the same sharks. For Izuku Midoriya, the years at Aldera Junior High were a masterclass in invisibility, a long, drawn-out montage set to the soundtrack of his own quiet suffering and fierce, secret determination. His life was divided into 3 distinct, warring territories: the hopeful sanctuary of his bedroom, the anxious battlefield of school, and the painful proving grounds he'd found for himself in the forgotten corners of the city. One such proving ground was a small, derelict junkyard near the industrial district, a place that smelled of rust and ozone and was piled high with the metal corpses of a forgotten era. It was here, surrounded by witnesses of crushed steel and shattered glass, that Izuku conducted his painful experiments. Today's subject was a dented, empty soda can perched atop a stack of bald tires. The goal was simple: release just enough stored kinetic energy to knock it over without paying the price in agony. It was a surgeon's task attempted with a sledgehammer. He took a deep breath, mimicking the centering techniques he'd read about in an article on a monk hero whose quirk allowed him to find perfect balance. He'd spent the walk over intentionally scuffing his feet, absorbing the small, repetitive impacts of his worn red sneakers against the pavement. A faint, low-level energy now hummed beneath his skin, a familiar and uncomfortable warmth. He extended his right hand, palm out, focusing on the can. Control, he thought, his brow furrowed in concentration. Not a burst. Just a nudge. Like midnight controlling her mist. A precise application. He tried to will the energy forward, to let a tiny wisp of it escape from his palm. He felt the power build in his arm, a dangerous pressure behind a dam. For a second, he saw the faint, emerald traceries of his quirk flicker to life, and then, pop. The sound was pathetic, barely louder than a cap gun. A puff of force, no bigger than his fist, shot out and dissipated a foot in front of his hand, ruffling a patch of weeds. The kin remained, mocking him in its stillness. Simultaneously, a sharp, biting pain lanced through his wrist, as if a nest of hornets had been disturbed within his bones. He hissed, clutching his arm and stumbling back. He leaned against a mountain of scrap metal, his teeth gritted, waiting for the angry throb to subside into the familiar, dull ache. Failure. Again. He would spend hours like this, trying and failing, each attempt a fresh lesson in his own limitations. He learned to absorb the impact of landing after jumping off a short ledge, his legs glowing for a moment before the deep, resonant ache set in. He learned that absorbing the vibrations from a passing train was possible, but left him feeling shaky and nauseous, the stored energy a jittery, unusable poison in his veins. The results of these sessions were etched onto his body. His arms and legs, usually hidden beneath the black fabric of his school uniform, were a road map of his quirk's toll. They were covered in a faint, intricate lattice of silvery, web-like scars, thin as a spider's thread, that shimmered slightly when the light caught them. They were the ghosts of the green light, the permanent record of every backlash, every fracture of power. He'd learned to treat the deep-set bruises and muscle strains himself, using ice packs and compression wraps his mother thought were for sports injuries. A lie that tasted more bitter every time he told it. School was a different kind of pain, less acute but more pervasive. He wasn't physically attacked as much as he was quarantined. Students gave him a wide berth in the hallways, as if his condition were contagious. Teachers' gazes would slide past him, their expressions a mix of pity and frustration. He was the problem child with the problem quirk, the boy who couldn't participate in gym class without risking a trip to the nurse, the student whose file was thick with incident reports from his elementary years. The school nurse, a tired-looking woman named Mrs. Yano, knew him by name. Midoriya-kun. She'd sigh, not unkindly, as he'd come in cradling a freshly bruised hand after a trip in the hallway. You have to be more careful. Your quirk, it's not suited for carelessness. He would just nod, accepting the instant ice pack, the truth of his training, a secret shame he kept locked away. He was a walking paradox. A boy with a combat-oriented quirk who was registered as medically fragile. And then there was Kaken. Katsuki Bakugo had only grown more intense, more arrogant, and more powerful with age. His explosions were no longer harmless pops but concussive blasts that left the air smelling of burnt sugar. He was the star of their school, the guaranteed future hero, and his rage towards Izuku had simmered and mutated into something complex and venomous. The old taunts about a useless, self-hurting quirk were still there, but they were now underpinned by a new, more cutting accusation: wastefulness. One afternoon, as the final bell shrieked its call to freedom, Izuku remained at his desk, frantically scribbling in his hero analysis notebook, number 12. He was dissecting the debut of the new hero Kamui Woods, his pen flying as he analyzed the applications of a wood-based quirk. Lacquered chain prison seems effective for capture, but what about fire-based villains? Is the wood naturally flame retardant? A potential weakness. Must remember this. A shadow fell over his desk. Still playing make-believe, Deku? Izuku flinched, snapping the notebook shut. He looked up into the smoldering crimson eyes of Katsuki Bakugo, flanked by his usual two cronies. Keikaken, Izuku stammered, his hands instinctively covering the notebook. I was just taking notes. Bakugo's lip curled into a sneer. He snatched the notebook before Izuku could react. Hero analysis for the future. He read aloud, his voice dripping with mockery. He flipped through the pages, seeing the detailed sketches, the complex notes, the obsessive scrawls. His sneer slowly faded, replaced by a dark, simmering anger. This wasn't just idle daydreaming. This was planning. You really think you can be a hero, don't you? Bakugo's voice was dangerously low. His crony snickered, but Bakugo wasn't laughing. He was genuinely, deeply incensed. I want to try, Izuku whispered, his gaze fixed on the floor. Try? Bakugo scoffed, slamming the notebook down on the desk. The sound echoed in the empty classroom. You don't try. You just sit there, scribbling in this creepy notebook, getting hurt from tripping over your own feet. You have a power, a destructive power, and you let it rot inside you. He leaned in close, his voice a harsh rasp. It's an insult, you know that? To me. To everyone who actually works for it. I spend every damn day pushing my quirk, making my explosions bigger, stronger. I deal with the kickback on my arms, the ringing in my ears. I'm honing my power into a weapon. And you treat yours like a disease. You're a coward, wasting what you were given. Izuku flinched at the word coward. It struck a nerve that was already raw and exposed. Was he a coward? Or was he just sensible? Where was the line between bravery and suicide? It's not that simple, Kaken, Izuku said, finding a sliver of courage. My quirk, it breaks me, so let it! Bakugo roared, his frustration boiling over. The sudden shout made Izuku jump. What's the point of having a power if you're too scared to use it? A sword that stays in its sheath is just a useless piece of metal. You've got a cannon inside you, and you're afraid of the damn recoil. To punctuate his point, Bakugo's right palm ignited. It wasn't a large explosion, just a sharp, concussive crack that he unleashed inches from Izuku's shoulder. It was a statement. This is power. This is control. The heat washed over Izuku, and the shockwave slammed into his side. Instinct, honed by years of playground shoves and accidental bumps, took over. He didn't even think. His body simply reacted. The kinetic force of the blast, the wave of displaced air, was drawn into him. The black fabric of his uniform sleeve did little to hide the sudden, brilliant flash of emerald light that traced its way up his arm, the fractured pattern illuminating the silvery scars beneath. The energy settled inside him, a coiled serpent of volatile power. It was more than he'd ever absorbed from a fall, more than any of his failed experiments. It felt like holding lightning in a bottle. He could feel it begging for release, a pressure building in his chest, in his limbs. He knew, with absolute certainty, that he could unleash it right now and send Bakugo flying across the room. He could break his own arm, yes, but he could finally hit back. He looked up at Bakugo, his green eyes shimmering with unshed tears and the faint, residual glow of his quirk. His arm trembled, not from fear, but from the strain of containment. Bakugo saw it. He saw the light, he saw the trembling, he saw the conflict in Deku's eyes. For a split second, he braced himself, a flicker of something. Was it anticipation? Respect, in his expression? Finally, that look seemed to say, "Show me." But Izuku did nothing. He took a deep, shuddering breath and forced the energy down. He clamped his will around the raging power, smothering it, pushing it into the deep, dark corners of his body where it could dissipate slowly, painfully, over the next several hours. The green light faded, leaving behind only the dull ache of restraint. He lowered his gaze back to the floor, his shoulders slumping in defeat. The silence that followed was heavier than any explosion. Bakugo's expression morphed from tense anticipation to utter, soul-deep contempt. This was the ultimate confirmation of everything he believed. Deku had the power, had the opportunity, and he chose to swallow it. He chose to remain weak. Useless. Bakugo breathed, the word of final judgment. He picked up Izuku's notebook. His hands were shaking, not with fear, but with a rage so profound it was almost chilling. He placed the notebook between his palms. Boom! A deliberate, powerful explosion engulfed the notebook. The smell of burnt paper and nitroglycerin filled the air. Bakugo dropped the smoking, blackened remains onto Izuku's desk. The cover was scorched beyond recognition, the edges of the pages turned to brittle, black ash. Izuku stared at the ruined book, his heart plummeting. Months of work. Pages of hope. Destroyed in an instant. Bakugo turned to leave, his cronies trailing behind him like pilot fish. He paused at the door, his back to Izuku. His voice, when he spoke, was cold and devoid of its usual heat. It was the detached cruelty of a god swatting a fly. You know, I was going to tell you not to even bother applying to UA, but I've got a better idea. He said, his tone casual, conversational. If you want to be a hero so bad, why don't you try taking a real hit for once? Something that matters. He glanced over his shoulder, his crimson eyes locking onto Izuku's. Maybe take a swan dive off the roof of the building. In the next life, you might be lucky enough to be born with a quirk you're not too pathetic to use. The words weren't a suggestion. They were a dismissal of his entire existence. Bakugo wasn't telling him to pray for a quirk in the next life. He was telling him to re-roll the dice on his current one, because this version was a failure. This version, with its broken, self-harming power, was worse than nothing. Then, he was gone. Izuku sat there, alone in the silent classroom, the acrid smoke from his notebook stinging his eyes. The energy from Bakugo's blast was a lead weight in his gut, a sickening churn of potential he had refused to unleash. The silence pressed in on him, amplifying Bakugo's final words until they were the only sound in the universe. Take a swan dive. Tears he hadn't even realized were coming began to fall, fat drops that sizzled on the hot, blackened cover of his notebook. He wasn't crying because of the command itself. He would never do that. He was crying because, for a terrifying, fleeting moment, he understood the twisted logic behind it. From Kaken's perspective, a quirk like his was a life sentence of pain and cowardice. A quirk like his was a cage. And Bakugo was telling him where to find the key. He shakily reached for the notebook, his fingers recoiling from the heat. Useless. Wasting what you were given. Pathetic. Was Kaken right? His whole life had been a study in avoidance. He avoided fights, he avoided using his quirk, he avoided standing up for himself. His dream of being a hero was a grand, beautiful fantasy. But the reality was that he was a boy who chose pain and inaction over and over again. His dream wasn't to be a hero. His dream was to be All Might. And All Might never hesitated. All Might never backed down. All Might never chose to swallow the power that could save someone. A cold dread washed over him. Maybe he couldn't be a hero. Not because his quirk hurt him, but because he was too afraid of the pain to ever truly use it when it mattered. He was a coward. Kaken was right. With numb fingers he gathered his things, his movements slow and robotic. He picked up the ruined notebook, cradling it like a dead bird. He could still make out some of his writing on the less charred inner pages. His own handwriting, mocking him with its hopeful analysis. He walked out of the school, the afternoon sun casting long, accusatory shadows. He found himself at the koi pond behind the building, the same place he'd had his lunch in solitude for years. He held the notebook over the water, his thumb rubbing over the scorched cover. He should just drop it. Let it sink and take his stupid, impossible dream with it. Maybe take a swan dive. He tipped the notebook, and it fell from his grasp. It hit the water with a soft splash. He watched as it floated for a moment, a pathetic black raft, before a group of curious koi converged on it, their orange and white mouths nibbling at the softened, pulpy edges of the pages. They were literally eating his dream. Something in him, a stubborn, indomitable spark that had survived years of torment, refused to let it go. No, he whispered, his voice hoarse. It's mine. He knelt down, plunging his hands into the cool water and snatching the notebook back from the fish. It was a dripping, disgusting mess, but it was his. He held it to his chest, water and flecks of ash soaking the front of his uniform. He wouldn't let Kakin have the last word. He wouldn't let the world just consume his hope. He would wring it out. He would dry the pages. He would rewrite the burnt parts. He would keep trying. He had to. Clutching the soggy, ruined symbol of his defiance, Izuku Midoriya started the long walk home. His mind was a maelstrom of shame, anger, and a renewed, desperate resolve. Kakin's words still echoed, a poison he couldn't get out of his system. Take a real hit for once. What did that even mean? A real hit. Like, from a villain? The thought was terrifying. His quirk was a shield made of glass. A single, powerful blow from a real villain wouldn't just bruise him or break a bone. It could kill him. The doctor had said so himself. But what if it didn't? A traitorous voice whispered in his mind. What if you could take it? Absorb it all. And then, what if you could finally let it go? He shook his head, trying to banish the thought. It was a martyr's fantasy, a reckless, suicidal daydream. That wasn't being a hero. That was just self-destruction. A hero's job was to save others, not to find a glorious way to die. He had to be smarter. He had to find a way to control it. His notebooks weren't a fantasy. They were his only hope. He was so lost in his thoughts, his eyes fixed on the cracked pavement, that he didn't notice the strange, gurgling sound coming from the manhole cover in the underpass ahead. He was replaying the scene in the classroom, feeling the phantom pressure of the absorbed energy, wondering if he would ever be brave enough, or stupid enough, to let it out. The sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. The underpass was a tunnel of shadow, and as he stepped into it, the air grew suddenly cold. The gurgling sound grew louder, wetter, accompanied by a foul stench like an open sewer. Izuku finally looked up, his thoughts scattering like startled birds. A monstrous form was rising from the open manhole, a shifting, semi-liquid mass of sludge and filth. Two malevolent, yellow eyes floated in the morass, fixing on him. A wide, jagged mouth stretched into a grotesque grin, revealing broken, stained teeth suspended in the goo. A medium-sized invisibility cloak. The villain rasped, its voice a wet, disgusting gurgle. Izuku froze, his blood turning to ice. The burnt notebook slipped from his numb fingers, landing with a wet slap on the concrete. The villain. A real villain. Right here, his mind went blank. All the analysis, all the strategies, all the theories about pain management and power mitigation, they all evaporated in a cloud of pure, primal terror. This wasn't a schoolyard bully. This wasn't a controlled experiment. This was a monster made of sewage and malice, and it was lunging straight for him. The weight of his potential, the heavy, volatile power he kept chained within him, was about to be put to the ultimate, horrifying test. For a horrifying, eternal second, Izuku Midoriya's world compressed into a vortex of stench and suffocation. The sludge villain was not a solid, but a force of nature, a disgusting, sentient tsunami. It washed over him, a cold, cloying weight that filled his mouth, his nose, his eyes. It was like drowning and being buried alive at the same time. The smell was unimaginable, a putrid combination of raw sewage, chemical waste, and something vaguely, horribly organic. Panic, cold and absolute, seized his heart. He thrashed, his limbs meeting only the frictionless give of the sludge. His lungs burned, screaming for air that wasn't there. The villain's gurgling voice was all around him, a wet rasp that vibrated through the filth. Don't worry, I'm just hijacking your body. It'll only hurt for about 45 seconds, then it'll all be over for you. Izuku's vision began to tunnel, the edges blurring into a dark, sparkling gray. This is it, he thought, a strange, detached calm settling over the terror. This is how I die. Drowned in garbage in an underpass. Not a hero. Not even a person. Just an invisibility cloak. Suddenly, a sound cut through the liquid prison. It was a sound he knew better than his own heartbeat, a booming, resonant baritone that promised salvation. Have no fear, you are safe! A tremendous gust of wind, a gale force of pure power, tore the villain apart. The sludge was ripped from Izuku's body with incredible violence, splattering against the concrete walls of the underpass. He collapsed onto the ground, gasping, coughing up viscous, foul-tasting filth, his lungs aching as they greedily drank in the clean, fresh air. He looked up, his vision blurry with tears and residual sludge. A silhouette stood against the light of the tunnel's entrance, a silhouette so iconic it was practically seared into the DNA of their society. Two prominent tufts of hair, like a rabbit's ears. A mountainous physique that seemed to bend the very light around it. And a smile, bright and reassuring as the sun. "Now that I am here, that is," All Might declared. The number one hero moved with practiced efficiency, scooping the splattered remains of the villain into 2 empty soda bottles he produced from his shopping bag. The entire ordeal, from rescue to capture, had taken less than 10 seconds. Izuku could only stare, his mind a short-circuiting mess of terror, awe, and disbelief. All Might. All Might. Right here. He was alive. He was saved by All Might. All Might. He stammered, scrambling to his feet. His body still trembled with adrenaline, and the phantom sensation of the sludge still clung to his skin. "Ah, good to see you're all right, my boy," All Might boomed, giving him a hearty pat on the shoulder that nearly sent him sprawling. "An unpleasant encounter, but worry no more. I have apprehended the evildoer." He held up the 2 soda bottles, where the villain's eyes and mouth swirled angrily in their plastic prison. Izuku's fanboy instincts, deeply ingrained and irrepressible, momentarily overrode his trauma. Holy crap! You're even bigger in person. See, can I please have your autograph?" He fumbled for his notebook, the soggy, scorched one he had rescued from the koi pond. It was a disgusting mess. "Oh, maybe on a different page," All Might chuckled. "Of course. Anything for a fan." He took the book, flipped to a clean page, and scrawled his signature in huge, bold strokes. "There you go. Now I must be off. Have to get this fellow to the authorities. Stay safe." With a final, dazzling smile, All Might crouched, preparing to launch himself into the sky. "Wait!" Izuku cried out, a sudden, desperate panic seizing him. He had so many questions. Questions that had haunted him for a decade. Questions no one else could answer. Can I be a hero? Can someone with a quirk that breaks them save anyone? Is there any hope at all? This was his one chance. His only chance. He couldn't let it fly away. Before he could think, before logic or reason could intervene, his legs were moving. As All Might launched into the air with a mighty whoosh, Izuku leaped and grabbed onto his leg, clinging on for dear life. The world dissolved into a blur of wind and cityscape. The force was immense, trying to peel his fingers from the hero's muscular calf. "Whoa, hey now! Let go!" All Might shouted, his voice barely audible over the roaring wind. "I love my fans, but this is a bit much. If I let go, I'll die." Izuku screamed back, his eyes squeezed shut against the terrifying velocity. "Oh. Good point." All Might angled his descent, landing with a gentle thud on the rooftop of a nearby department store. Izuku collapsed onto the rooftop, his limbs feeling like jelly, his heart trying to hammer its way out of his chest. "That," All Might said, a hint of exasperation in his voice, "was incredibly reckless, young man. You could have been killed." He looked down at Izuku, and his usual smile was gone, replaced by a look of stern concern. Then, his eyes widened slightly as he recognized him. Not his face, but the faint, silvery scars that traced their way up his neck from under his uniform collar. It was an unmistakable sign of a backlash-type quirk. He'd seen similar, though less extensive, scarring on heroes who pushed their bodies too far. Just as All Might was about to continue his lecture, he was seized by a violent, rattling cough. Blood, shockingly red, spattered from between his lips onto the back of his hand. "Damn it all!" he wheezed, and then, to Izuku's utter horror, the hero began to deflate. In a grotesque plume of steam, the mountain of muscle vanished, shrinking into the form of a skeletal, emaciated man with sunken eyes and sharp, angular features. The iconic costume hung off his frail frame like a flag on a windless day. Izuku could only stare, his mouth agape. Wah, you're an imposter! A fake, I assure you, I am All Might," the man rasped, wiping the blood from his mouth. He sat down heavily on the rooftop ledge. He lifted his t-shirt, revealing a horrific, starburst-shaped scar that covered the entire left side of his torso. It was a vortex of mangled flesh and surgical marks, a wound so grievous it seemed impossible to survive. I got this in a fight 5 years back. My respiratory system was basically destroyed, and I lost my whole stomach. All the surgeries have worn me down, and it's limited the time I can use my muscle form. Right now, I can only do hero work for about 3 hours a day. Izuku felt the world tilting on its axis. The symbol of peace was broken. The pillar of society was hollow. All Might, the hero who smiled in the face of any danger, was smiling through unimaginable, constant pain. The silence on the rooftop was heavy, broken only by the distant city sounds. Izuku's own question, the one that had propelled him into the sky, now felt small and foolish. But the sight of All Might's injury, the proof that even the greatest hero could be broken, gave him a sliver of courage. He took a shaky breath. I have a quirk, he began, his voice barely a whisper. All Might's hollow eyes fixed on him. It's called kinetic rebound. I can absorb kinetic energy and release it, but it hurts me. A lot. Even a small release causes deep bruises. A big one, the doctor said it could shatter my bones. It leaves. He gestured to his own scarred neck. He looked at the frail hero, at the man behind the myth, and asked the question that was the sum of his entire existence. Can someone like me? Can someone with a self-destructive quirk, one that breaks them every time they use it, can they still be a hero like you? All Might looked at the boy, at his earnest, tear-filled eyes, at the faded scars peeking from his collar, at the desperate hope radiating from him, and his expression softened with a deep, profound sadness. He thought of his own shattered body, of the constant pain he endured, of the promises he'd made to a world that needed a symbol more than it needed a man. And he thought of this child, wanting to walk a path paved with even more pain, a path where every victory would be paid for with a piece of himself. His answer was quiet, but it carried the weight of a tombstone. No, the word hit Izuku with the force of a physical blow. He staggered back, his breath catching in his throat. To be a hero, All Might continued, his voice gentle but firm, is to be a shield. You throw yourself between danger and the innocent. But a shield that shatters on the first blow is no shield at all, it's just debris. A hero needs to save the person in front of them, and then they need to be able to get up and save the next person. And the next. Your quirk, as you describe it, it's a one-way ticket to the hospital, or the morgue. It's not a tool for heroism, it's a liability. He gestured to his own horrific scar. Look at me. I have the power to level cities, and this is what one bad fight did to me. The world of heroes is not a kind one, kid. It's brutal and unforgiving. It will take everything from you. If you start your career already broken, there will be nothing left of you to give. He stood up, his tall, skeletal frame silhouetted against the setting sun. It's not wrong to have a dream, young man. But you need to be realistic. You have a good heart. A desire to help people. That's admirable. Be a police officer. They get overlooked, but they do incredible work. Be a doctor. You could heal people who've been hurt by villains. You can save lives in other ways, ways that don't require you to shatter your own bones to do it. All Might's words weren't cruel. They were kind. They were logical. They were pragmatic. And that's what made them so utterly, devastatingly final. He wasn't crushing a dream. He was performing a mercy killing. Suddenly, a loud explosion rocked the city, sending a plume of black smoke into the orange sky. All Might flinched, his head snapping towards the sound. He patted his pockets, a look of dawning horror on his face. The soda bottles. They weren't there. Oh no, he whispered, his eyes wide. In our little aerial adventure, he must have fallen out. Izuku's blood ran cold. The sludge villain. It had escaped. And it was his fault. His reckless, desperate act had unleashed a monster back onto the city. All Might cursed, clutching his side as a wave of pain shot through him. He was out of time. He couldn't transform. Stay here, he ordered Izuku, before turning and heading for the rooftop door, his movements stiff and pained. Don't follow me. This is a mess I have to clean up. Izuku could only watch him go, his hero's final words echoing in his ears. Be realistic. a shield that shatters. No. He sank to his knees on the hard concrete, the distant siren starting to wail. His dream wasn't just dead. He had helped bury it himself. The walk down the department store stairs was a descent into a personal hell. Each step felt heavy, leaden with the weight of All Might's judgment. By the time he reached the street, a crowd had already gathered, their faces turned towards the source of the smoke and explosions. Izuku was drawn into the current of morbid curiosity, his body moving on autopilot. He arrived at the entrance to a narrow commercial alleyway. The scene was pure chaos. Fires raged from a dozen storefronts. Heroes were on the scene, but they were helpless. The rookie hero Kamui Woods was busy evacuating civilians, his wooden limbs useless against the raging fires. The powerhouse Death Arms was trying to clear debris, but he couldn't get a solid grip on the liquid form of the sludge villain. Backdraft was desperately trying to fight the fires, but the villain's sheer mass and the explosions erupting from its core were overwhelming his water streams. And at the center of it all, trapped in the same suffocating grip that had almost claimed him, was a figure he knew all too well. Spiky blonde hair. A furious, terrified expression, and hands that were popping and crackling with explosions. It was Kaken. Bakugo was being consumed, but he wasn't going down without a fight. He was unleashing explosion after explosion from within the villain's body, desperately trying to blast his way free. But his struggles were only making things worse, feeding the flames and making it impossible for the heroes to approach. Izuku's mind, the analytical mind that had filled 13 notebooks, kicked into gear despite his despair. Kamui is weak to fire. Death Arm's strength is useless against a fluid enemy. Backdraft can't get close enough. They don't have the right quirks for the situation. He'd written this exact scenario down a dozen times. A villain that required a very specific type of counter, and the heroes on the scene were all wrong. The crowd murmured around him. Why aren't the heroes doing anything? It's that sludge villain from the news earlier. That poor kid, he's still fighting. Then, Izuku's gaze locked onto Bakugo. Through the swirling sludge and smoke, for a single, heart-stopping moment, their eyes met. And in Bakugo's eyes, beneath the rage and the pride, Izuku saw something he had never seen there before, pure, undiluted terror. It was the face of a boy who knew he was going to die. A face that was pleading, for help. For a hero. And in that moment, everything else fell away. All Might's pragmatic advice. The doctor's dire warnings. A decade of fear and pain. Bakugo's cruelty, his taunts, the smoking ruin of his notebook. None of it mattered. What mattered was the terrified face of a kid who needed saving. Bakugo's words from that afternoon, the cruelest words he'd ever said, flashed in Izuku's mind with a new, horrifying clarity. Take a real hit for once. His legs just started moving. He burst from the crowd, a small, insignificant figure sprinting towards an impossible threat. The heroes shouted at him. Hey! Stop! It's too dangerous! Get back here, you idiot! He ignored them. His mind was a whirlwind, but his body was acting on an instinct so pure it was almost holy. He didn't have a plan. He didn't have a backpack to throw this time. He only had himself. He only had his broken, useless quirk. The sludge villain saw him coming, one of its massive, liquid tendrils whipping out to swat him like a fly. It was a blur of motion, a wall of force moving too fast to dodge, and Izuku didn't try to. He remembered All Might's words, a shield that shatters. He remembered Bakugo's words, take a real hit. Okay, he thought, a strange, terrifying calm washing over him. Okay. Instead of dodging, he lowered his shoulder and ran directly into the path of the attack. The impact was cataclysmic. It felt less like a punch and more like being hit by a freight train made of water. The force should have pulverized him, should have sent him flying into a brick wall as a broken heap. But his quirk, his cursed, treacherous quirk, flared to life on a scale he had never imagined. His entire body became a beacon of emerald light. The green energy didn't just trace his veins, it saturated him, pouring into every cell. The web of silvery scars on his skin blazed with internal fire, glowing through his uniform. The world dissolved into a silent, white-hot roar of agony and pure, undiluted power. He felt the impact not as pain, but as a torrent of raw energy flooding the fragile container of his body. It was too much. Far too much. He could feel his bones groaning, his muscles screaming under a strain they were never meant to bear. But he was still on his feet. He had taken the hit. He had absorbed it. The villain recoiled, momentarily stunned. Nothing had ever withstood a blow like that. The brief hesitation was all Izuku needed. He stumbled forward, the green light pulsing around him like a frantic heartbeat, and reached the core of the villain where Bakugo was trapped. "Kaken!" he screamed, his voice raw. He began to claw at the sludge covering Bakugo's face, his fingers sinking into the disgusting ooze. It was like trying to dig through mud. Useless. Futile. "What the hell are you doing here, Deku?" Bakugo choked out, his eyes wide with disbelief and something else, something Izuku couldn't name. "I don't know!" Izuku cried, tears streaming down his face, mingling with the grime. "My legs they just started moving. I couldn't just stand there and watch you die." He looked at Bakugo, his expression a desperate, tear-streaked grimace that was almost a smile. You looked like you needed saving, that was it." The core of him, laid bare. It wasn't about being strong, or being recognized, or proving anyone wrong. It was simply that someone needed help, and he couldn't bear to do nothing. His heart was, and always had been, stubbornly, immutably, that of a hero. His interference, however brief, had broken the stalemate. It had reminded the other heroes what was at stake. But it had also enraged the villain. "You again!" the sludge monster roared. "I'll kill you!" Another massive tendril formed and slammed into Izuku, swatting him away with contemptuous ease. This time, he had no chance to brace. He was sent flying through the air, tumbling end over end, straight towards the solid brick wall of an adjacent building. The energy he had absorbed from the first blow was still raging inside him, a contained supernova looking for an exit. The second impact added to it, pushing him past his limits into a realm of pure agony. He knew, with chilling certainty, that hitting the wall would be the end. But in that split second of aerial chaos, his analytical mind took over. Backlash. Release. Direction. He couldn't use his arms. They were flailing for balance. He couldn't release it in a burst around him. That was too uncontrolled. But his legs were below him. All or nothing. He forced his will, his focus, his entire being downwards. He channeled the entirety of the apocalyptic energy raging within him into his legs. The world went silent. The green light around his body vanished, sucked down into his lower limbs. For an instant, his legs glowed with the intensity of a dying star. And then he released it. It wasn't an explosion. It was a focused, directional blast of pure kinetic force that erupted from the soles of his shoes. There was no sound of a bang, only a sickening, wet crunch that was drowned out by the roar of displaced air. The shockwave was so powerful it shattered the asphalt beneath him, kicking up a cloud of dust and debris. The blast acted like a pair of gargantuan thrusters, arresting his fatal momentum. His trajectory went from a horizontal line towards the wall to a vertical drop. He fell the last 10 feet, landing in a crumpled heap on the cracked pavement. He screamed. The pain was a universe unto itself. It was white, and black, and red, and absolute. He looked down. His ankles were twisted at impossible angles, the bones visibly shattered beneath the skin. The backlash from releasing that much power, even through his untouched body, had been catastrophic. He had used his legs as the exhaust port for a cannon, and they had been utterly destroyed in the process. He couldn't move. He couldn't even think. There was only the fire in his legs and the taste of copper in his mouth. But through the haze of pain, he saw two things. Bakugo was still alive, and he had bought him a few more seconds. It was in that moment of supreme sacrifice, of a broken boy lying shattered on the ground for the sake of his tormentor, that a new figure arrived on the scene. A gust of wind tore through the alley. "I really am pathetic," a familiar voice said, filled with self-loathing and a newfound fury. The crowd gasped as All Might, back in his muscle form, appeared as if from nowhere. But the smile was gone. His face was a mask of cold, hard rage. He had seen it all. He had seen the boy he told to be realistic perform the most unreal, selfless, heroic act he had ever witnessed. He had seen that boy shatter himself to uphold the very ideal All Might championed. He strode forward, His eyes locked on the sludge villain, but his thoughts were on the broken child on the ground. "I am here," he said, but there was no warmth in it. It was a promise of violent retribution. Detroit. Smash! His punch was more than just a punch. It was filled with the rage of a mentor who had failed, the admiration for a spirit he had misjudged, and the desperate need to validate the sacrifice of the boy lying broken just a few feet away. The force of the blow was so immense it changed the weather, creating an updraft that caused rain to fall from a clear blue sky. The villain was obliterated, scattered into harmless droplets that mixed with the sudden downpour. The fires were extinguished. The danger was over. As the press swarmed and the other heroes recovered, All Might stood over Bakugo, shielding him from the cameras. But his gaze was fixed on Izuku, who was now being carefully attended to by frantic paramedics. He saw the boy's mangled legs, his pain-filled eyes, the way he still tried to push himself up to make sure everyone was okay. And All Might knew, with a certainty that shook him to his very core, that he had been wrong. He hadn't been talking to a child with a dangerous quirk. He had been talking to a true hero. The aftermath was a blur of pain, flashing lights, and murmuring voices. The paramedics stabilized his legs in bulky air splints, the hissing sound of their inflation drowned out by the throbbing in his bones. The heroes who had been helpless, Death Arms and the others, came over to scold him for his recklessness, but their words lacked conviction. Their eyes held a grudging, confused respect. Bakugo was praised for his resilience, for his powerful quirk, but he was silent, his gaze fixed on the ambulance where they were loading Izuku, his expression unreadable. They didn't take him to a hospital. They treated him on site, a quirk-using medic knitting the larger bone fragments together enough for him to walk with crutches, warning him he'd need weeks of proper recovery. He was a problem, an anomaly they just wanted to clear from the scene. He started the slow, agonizing hobble home, the crutches awkward under his arms. Despair was a cold, heavy cloak. He hadn't saved anyone. He had just gotten in the way, broken himself for nothing, and forced All Might to push past his limit. He was a failure. A reckless, useless, broken failure. All Might's words echoed in his head. No, be realistic. He had proven him right. "I am here!" the voice boomed from behind him. Izuku flinched, nearly losing his balance on his crutches as All Might, back in his muscle form, zipped around the corner and stood before him. "All Might? What are you doing here? You were swarmed by reporters. Getting away from them is nothing for me," the hero declared, striking a pose before deflating back into his skeletal form with a pathetic wheeze of steam. "Young man, I came here to thank you, and to apologize." Izuku stared, bewildered. "Thank me? But I just got in your way. I didn't do anything." "You did," All Might said, his voice serious. "The stories of all the great heroes have one thing in common. Their bodies moved before they had a chance to think. That's what happened to you back there, wasn't it?" Izuku thought back to that moment, to seeing Bakugo's terrified eyes. He nodded, tears welling up. "Yes, you, a boy I had just lectured and dismissed, ran into danger without a second thought to save another. You reminded me what it truly means to be a hero." All Might bowed his head slightly. "For that I thank you." Izuku was speechless. Tears streamed freely down his face. The words he had longed to hear his entire life, the validation from his greatest idol, were washing over him, healing a part of him that his quirk could never break. But then, All Might's expression hardened. He stepped forward, and his hand, surprisingly strong in his frail form, clamped down on Izuku's shoulder. His gaze was intense, a mixture of awe and terrifying gravity. "But you were also a fool," he said, his voice low and sharp. He gestured with his other hand towards Izuku's splinted, mangled legs. "Look at yourself. You won nothing. You bought seconds at the cost of your own body. You threw yourself away on a gamble, and it was my intervention that saved you, not your sacrifice." He leaned in closer, his sunken eyes boring into Izuku's. "That quirk of yours, it is a curse of potential. A hero's spirit trapped in a glass cannon. Today, it was your ankles. What about tomorrow? Your spine? Your skull? There are villains out there who could make you absorb so much energy you'd simply pop." The imagery was grotesque, but brutally honest. That quirk of yours will kill you long before any villain does, young man. The words hung in the air between them, a chilling prophecy. All Might praised the heart, but condemned the very power that was inextricably linked to it. He had validated Izuku's soul while simultaneously signing the death warrant for his dream. Izuku stood there, balanced precariously on his crutches, trapped between the greatest praise of his life and the most terrifying warning. He had the heart of a hero, but the price of using it was his own destruction. The path forward was not a glorious road to heroism, but a tightrope walk over an abyss of self-immolation, and he had no idea how to cross it. The silence that followed All Might's chilling prophecy was thick and suffocating. It settled over the empty street, amplifying the distant hum of the city and the painful creak of Izuku's crutches. The duality of the hero's message was a physical weight, pressing down on Izuku's shoulders. You are a hero. Your power will kill you. Praise and condemnation, wrapped in the same grim package. He was a paradox, a living contradiction, and the number one hero had just confirmed it. Izuku's gaze fell to the pavement, his vision blurring with a fresh wave of tears. It was all true. His sacrifice had been meaningless. He had been a speed bump for the villain, a brief, self-destructive distraction. He hadn't saved Kaken, All Might had. His heroism was a footnote in a story about his own fragility. He was a candle that burned brilliantly for a single, glorious second before extinguishing itself, leaving only the smell of smoke and the memory of light. What good was a hero who could only act once? You're right, Izuku whispered, his voice cracking with the admission. The fight went out of him, replaced by a cold, hollow resignation. I was useless. I couldn't help it. But you're right, I can't be a hero. My quirk, it's a trap. All Might watched the boy, his skeletal frame silhouetted by the last vestiges of twilight. He saw the light of hope, which had burned so fiercely just moments before, flicker and die in the young man's eyes. He saw a heroic spirit buckling under the weight of a cruel biological reality. And in that moment, Toshinori Yagi made a decision. It was a decision that would defy a lifetime of searching, upend centuries of tradition, and gamble the fate of the world on the most broken, yet most worthy, candidate he had ever met. Not on its own it is, All Might said, his voice quiet but charged with a new, profound intensity. Izuku looked up, his tear-streaked face a mask of confusion. What? Your quirk? Your spirit? They are a perfect engine with a faulty chassis, All Might explained, his hollow eyes gleaming with a strange, almost manic light. You have the will of a true hero, the drive to throw yourself into the fire without a moment's hesitation. But your body, your vessel, is fundamentally incapable of containing the power you wield, let alone the power you will need to face the threats that are coming. He took a step closer, his presence seeming to grow, to fill the space around him despite his emaciated form. I told you about my injury. About my limits. What I didn't tell you is the nature of my quirk. He paused, letting the weight of the impending revelation settle. Izuku could only stare, his mind reeling, trying to process the sudden shift in the conversation. People believe I have a simple super-strength quirk. A common, if powerful, mutation. They are wrong. All Might's voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper, a secret shared between two souls on a lonely street corner. My quirk is not one I was born with. It was passed down to me, like a sacred torch, and it is a power that I can, in turn, pass on to another. Izuku's brain, already overloaded with the emotional and physical trauma of the day, simply refused to compute. Pass down? Like an inheritance? But quirks are biological. They're genetic. That's impossible. And yet it is the truth, All Might affirmed. The name of my quirk is One for All. The name itself seemed to have power, to resonate in the air. Izuku mouthed the words, a silent, disbelieving echo. One for all. All Might repeated, a reverent awe in his tone. It is the union of two quirks. Long ago, in the dawn of this superpowered age, there was a man with a quirk that could steal other quirks. His name was All for One. The name was spoken like a curse, a foul taste in the hero's mouth. His younger brother, who appeared to be quirkless, opposed his evil. The brother had a seemingly useless quirk that only allowed him to pass his power on to others. In a twisted act of dominance, all for one forced a powerful, energy-stockpiling quirk upon his brother. Izuku's analytical mind, his one true refuge, began to stir. He could almost see the diagram in his head, the flowchart of impossible events. The two quirks merged. All Might continued, his gaze distant, as if seeing ghosts from a bygone era. The useless quirk that could be passed on, and the quirk that stockpiled power, together they became something new. A sacred legacy. One for all. A power that can be transferred from person to person, growing stronger with each generation. A torch flame of hope passed down to fight against the encroaching darkness. He looked directly at Izuku, and the intensity in his eyes was blinding. I am the 8th holder of this power. And I have searched for a worthy successor for years. I was running out of time, my body failing, with no candidate truly embodying the spirit of this quirk. He gestured with a frail hand towards Izuku. Until today, when I saw you, a boy with a dangerous, self-harming quirk, run into certain death because it was the right thing to do. In that moment, you proved you were more of a hero than anyone else on that street. Izuku's crutches felt like they were about to give way. His shattered ankles throbbed in time with his hammering heart. This couldn't be real. It was a dream, a pain-induced hallucination. All Might, the symbol of peace, was standing in front of him, telling him a story that sounded like a comic book myth, and offering him. Me? He choked out, the word a squeak of pure disbelief. But I'm broken. My quirk is a curse. You said so yourself? How could I possibly? That, All Might said, a thin, triumphant smile gracing his lips for the first time since he'd deflated, is where you are wrong. And where I finally am right. The offer, Izuku was about to realize, was not what he thought it was. This was not the offer that would have been made to a quirkless boy. This was something entirely different. Young Midoriya, I am not offering you one for all to give you a chance to be a hero. You already are one. Your heart is ironclad. What you lack is a body that can keep up with it. All Might's voice became that of a master strategist, a seasoned veteran laying out a battle plan. Think, my boy. Use that analytical mind of yours. What is the fundamental nature of one for all? It stockpiles power, Izuku recited, his brain slowly catching up. Exactly. It is a torrent of pure, raw energy that flows through the wielder's body. To even activate it, the user's body must be incredibly strong, or it will be torn apart. But there's more to it than that. It's not just about offense. One for all is a full-body reinforcement. It enhances every aspect of the user's physical being: strength, speed, durability, resilience. It turns a normal human body into a superhuman vessel, a flicker of understanding, a tiny, brilliant spark, ignited in the darkness of Izuku's mind. He looked down at his own hands, at the faint, silvery scars that were a testament to his fragility. All Might saw the spark and fanned it into a flame. Your quirk, kinetic rebound, is a magnificent power trapped in a prison of flesh and bone. Your body is a poor container, unable to withstand the backlash of your own abilities. You are a glass cannon, as I said. But what if you weren't made of glass anymore? What if you were made of steel? The idea hit Izuku with the force of a physical revelation. It was so simple, so elegant, it was breathtaking. You mean? Izuku's voice trembled with the dawning implication. One for all, it wouldn't replace my quirk. It would fortify it. Precisely. All Might boomed, his enthusiasm making him seem larger, stronger. One for all is the solution, not the replacement. It is the key that will finally unlock the cage your own power is trapped in. Imagine it, young man. A body fortified by the strength of generations, a vessel so resilient that it can withstand the cataclysmic backlash of your kinetic rebound. You could absorb more energy than you ever dreamed of. You could release it with a force that could rival my own smash, and your bones wouldn't just shatter, they would hold. The world, which had been gray and hopeless moments before, exploded into a supernova of color and potential. It wasn't about inheriting a legacy, it was about completing himself. OFA wasn't a gift to replace what he lacked, it was the missing piece of his own personal puzzle. The perfect synergy. The ultimate fusion. Kinetic rebound was the devastating warhead, and one for all was the reinforced missile casing required to deliver it. His mind, which had been filled with despair, was now racing, filled with possibilities, with strategies, with a future he hadn't dared to even dream of. He could use a low percentage of OFA's full-body reinforcement to simply tank hits, making his absorption ability a true shield. He could use the speed of OFA to position himself to take impacts for others. He could channel OFA's strength into a punch and, at the moment of impact, release the stored kinetic energy from his own quirk for a compound attack, a devastating 1-2 punch of unimaginable power. He wouldn't just be a hero. He could be a new kind of hero, one who wielded two powers in perfect, brutal harmony. He looked at All Might, the skeletal man who was offering him not just a power, but a solution to his life's greatest torment. The tears were flowing freely again, but they were no longer tears of sadness or despair. They were tears of overwhelming, cathartic hope. A dam of anguish that had been building for 10 long years had finally burst. "It's a dangerous path," All Might warned, his expression sobering. "The power of one for all is immense. Even a perfectly healthy body can be torn apart by it if not properly prepared. For you, the stakes are even higher. You won't just be learning to control one volatile quirk, but two. You'll have to become a master of your own biology, a physicist of your own power. It will be a lifetime of painful training and brutal self-discovery." He offered his hand, a frail, bony thing that held the promise of unimaginable power. "But I believe you can do it. I believe you have the heart, the mind, and the indomitable will to forge yourself into the hero this world needs. So what do you say, young Midoriya? Do you accept this power? Will you take this quirk and make it, and your own, truly yours?" Izuku didn't hesitate. There was no other possible answer. This was the culmination of every notebook, every painful training session, every tear of frustration, every ounce of hope he had clung to in the dark. He reached out a trembling hand, ignoring the pain in his crutch-strained shoulders, and grasped All Might's. "Yes," he said, his voice thick with emotion but clear as a bell. "Yes. I accept." A genuine, warm smile finally spread across Toshinori Yagi's face. It was not the beaming, camera-ready smile of the symbol of peace. It was the proud, heartfelt smile of a mentor who had finally found his successor. "Excellent," All Might said, his grip surprisingly firm. "I knew you would. But this is where the real work begins. The UA entrance exam is in 10 months. In that time you must transform your body. You are a worthy vessel in spirit, but in flesh, you are less than zero. You need to build a foundation of muscle, of strength, that can handle the raw influx of one for all without instantly combusting." He released Izuku's hand and straightened up, a newfound energy seeming to flow through him. "I will create a personalized training regimen for you, a customized American dream plan that will push you to your absolute limits and beyond. It will be the 10 most grueling months of your life." His sunken eyes twinkled with a familiar, heroic fire. "Your journey to forge your body into a proper vessel begins now. It's going to be hell." Hell, Izuku soon discovered, smelled like brine, rust, and generations of illegally dumped trash. Dagoba Municipal Beach Park had once been a beautiful stretch of coastline. Now, it was a man-made mountain range of garbage. Discarded refrigerators, skeletal car frames, mountains of tires, and decades of forgotten consumer waste were piled high, choking the sand and poisoning the ocean currents. It was a monument to societal neglect. And for the next 10 months, it was to be Izuku's personal gym, his crucible, and his classroom. All Might, in his muscle form, stood atop a teetering pile of broken washing machines, a grand silhouette against the rising sun. "The modern hero is a jack of all trades," he boomed, his voice echoing across the wasteland. "Public service, community outreach, it all starts here. You will restore this entire coastline. This will be the physical manifestation of your effort to become a worthy vessel." Izuku, armed with a pair of work gloves and a debilitating amount of self-doubt, looked at the literal mountain of trash. All of it," he squeaked. His ankles, now mostly healed but still tender, ached in protest at the very thought. "Yes, all of it," All Might confirmed. "This is not just about building muscle, my boy. This is about discipline. About pushing past your perceived limits. Every piece of trash you move is a step towards controlling one for all." And so it began. The first few weeks were pure, unadulterated agony. Izuku's body, already underdeveloped and scarred by his quirk's backlash, screamed in protest. He hauled tires until his arms felt like they would detach from their sockets. He dragged sodden couches across the sand, his legs burning with lactic acid. He filled wheelbarrows with rusted scrap metal until his back felt like it would snap. Every night, he would collapse into bed, a symphony of aches and pains, only to be woken before dawn by a text from All Might. "Time to haul trash, young hero." But the training was not just mindless labor. All Might was a surprisingly meticulous, if eccentric, teacher. The American Dream Plan was a detailed schedule that covered everything from diet and sleep schedules to targeted muscle group workouts using the very trash he was clearing. More importantly, the training was twofold. The mornings were dedicated to the grueling physical labor of cleaning the beach, building the vessel for OFA. But the afternoons were for a different, more delicate kind of training, learning to control kinetic rebound. "Your quirk is a reflex," All Might explained one afternoon, standing before Izuku on a cleared patch of sand. He was in his skeletal form, a stark contrast to the powerhouse he'd been that morning. "You absorb impacts instinctively. That is both a gift and a curse. You cannot control what you absorb, so you must learn, with surgical precision, to control what you release." These sessions became a painful, frustrating dance. All Might, even in his frail form, possessed incredible control. He would deliver a series of controlled, light punches to Izuku's outstretched arm. They weren't strong enough to cause serious harm, but each one sent a jolt of kinetic energy into Izuku's body, causing his arm to glow with that familiar emerald light. "There," Tashinori would say, tapping Izuku's glowing forearm. "Feel that? That is the energy. It feels volatile, yes? Like a shaken bottle of soda. You have been trying to simply open the cap and let it explode. I want you to learn how to open it slowly, to let the pressure out in a controlled hiss." Izuku would concentrate, his face scrunched up, trying to will a small, harmless puff of force from his palm. More often than not, it would end with either a pathetic fizzle of nothing, or a small, sharp pop that would send a fresh wave of pain through his arm and leave a new, spiderweb bruise forming under the skin. "No, no, no!" Tashinori would chide gently. "You are thinking of it as a weapon. A punch. Stop thinking of it as an attack. Think of it as an exhale. The energy wants to escape. Guide it. Don't force it." He introduced new concepts, new ways for Izuku to think about his own power. "The energy you release doesn't have to be purely kinetic," he explained, drawing diagrams in the sand. "Energy is transferable. Kinetic, thermal, sonic, even photonic. Try to release the backlash not as force, but as something else. Try to release it as heat." The first time Izuku tried this, he managed to make his palm feel uncomfortably warm for a few seconds before the energy burst uncontrollably, nearly dislocating his thumb. But it was a start. It was a new path, a new possibility. The months crawled by, measured in cleared sections of the beach and shrinking mountains of trash. Izuku's body began to change. The scrawny, awkward boy was slowly being chiseled away, revealing a lean, wiry strength beneath. His shoulders broadened. His arms and legs, once thin as sticks, became corded with nascent muscle. He could now haul a refrigerator on his back, his legs straining but holding firm. The constant physical exertion made him feel more grounded in his own body than ever before. His control over kinetic rebound was improving at a glacial pace, but it was improving. He learned to dissipate small impacts, like a friendly clap on the back from All Might, as a faint, harmless shimmer of light from his skin. He could release the energy from a light tap as a steady, focused push of air, strong enough to blow sand around but not strong enough to hurt himself. These were tiny victories, but they were victories nonetheless. Finally, on the morning of the UA entrance exam, 10 months of hell came to a climax. The sun rose over a pristine, beautiful coastline. The sand was clean, the water sparkled, and the last piece of trash, a rusted, heavy industrial freezer, was all that remained. Izuku, his body now a testament to his labor, stood before it. He was no longer the boy who had started this journey. He was lean, strong, and his eyes held a new, hard-won confidence. All Might, in his muscle form, stood beside him, a look of immense pride on his face. He put a hand on Izuku's shoulder. You did it, my boy. You went beyond. You not only followed my plan, you exceeded it. You have forged yourself into a magnificent vessel. He pointed to the freezer. Now, for your graduation ceremony. Izuku took a deep breath, planted his feet, and with a guttural roar that seemed to come from the very core of his being, he lifted the freezer. He hoisted it onto his back and, step by grueling step, carried it to the truck waiting to haul the last of the scrap away. He stood atop the now empty mountain of cleared trash, the place where All Might had stood on that first day, and he let out a scream of pure, unadulterated triumph. It was a roar of defiance against a decade of pain, of fear, of being told he was useless and broken. All Might recorded the moment on his phone, tears of pride in his eyes. He walked over to the exhausted but exhilarated boy. Well done, young Midoriya, he said, his voice thick with emotion. He then plucked a single strand of his golden hair. Now for your reward. He held it out to Izuku. Eat this. Izuku stared at the hair, his triumphant expression melting into one of pure, baffled confusion. Ha! To inherit my power, you have to ingest some of my DNA. All Might explained with a grin. That's how it works. Now hurry! We're running out of time before the exam. Izuku, his mind still reeling from the sheer absurdity of the situation after 10 months of brutal, scientific training, hesitantly took the hair. He looked at his idol. He looked at the single golden strand. He closed his eyes and, with a grimace, swallowed. For a moment, nothing happened. He felt nothing. Just the anticlimactic sensation of swallowing a hair, and then it hit him. It was not an explosion. It was not a flash of light. It was a deep, profound, and utterly transformative settling. It felt like a vast, empty reservoir inside of him, a space he never knew existed, was suddenly filled to the brim with a cool, powerful, humming energy. It was a feeling of wholeness, of immense, untapped potential. It felt like coming home. As the power of One for All flooded into his system, something incredible happened. The silvery, web-like scars that covered his body, the permanent marks of his own quirk's backlash, began to glow. But this time, it wasn't the volatile, fractured green of kinetic rebound. It was a steady, warm, golden-green light, as if the new power was flowing through the old channels, reinforcing them, healing them from within. He felt a profound new resilience in his very cells, a deep, cellular strength that anchored him. He looked down at his hands, watching the faint golden light fade from his scars. He clenched his fists. He felt strong. Not just muscularly strong, but fundamentally, existentially strong. He felt ready. All Might clapped him on the back, a proud, fatherly gesture. How does it feel, my boy? To have the strength of 8 generations coursing through your veins? Izuku looked up at his mentor, his eyes shining with a determination that was now backed by real, tangible power. He felt the familiar, low-level hum of his own quirk, but now it was harmonized with the deeper, more resonant thrum of One for All. There were 2 notes in a single, powerful chord. It feels, Izuku said, a confident smile spreading across his face for the first time in his life. Like the beginning. He stood on the precipice of his dream, his body a newly forged vessel, his heart unchanged, and his soul now armed with the power to finally match his will. He turned his gaze towards the city, towards the distant, H-shaped silhouette of Yue High School. His real trial was about to begin.